Hi, my name is Andrew Barker, and the book I chose to review is called Culture Wars in Brazil, The First Vargas Regime, 1930 to 1945 by Darrell Williams. Darrell Williams is an associate professor of history at the University of Maryland and the winner of the American Historical Association's John Edwin Fagg Prize. Williams has conducted much research examining the fine arts and Brazilian history. In this book review, I will first discuss the political landscape leading up to Vargas's rise to power to set the scene for the culture wars of the Estado Novo, in which I will focus on the policies of cultural management and the creation of a national memory. And finally, I will discuss the lasting effects of Vargas's cultural policies after the coup of 1945. In 1930, Getulio de Neves Vargas, the governor of Rio Grande do Sul and a former minister of the Treasury, came to power with a bloodless coup that overthrew the democratically elected president, Washington Luiz. Regional oligarchs from Minas Gerais, Rio Grande do Sul, and Rio de Janeiro had supported Vargas in the 1930 elections in hopes of political and economic reform. The regional elites had refused to support President Luiz's pick of Julio Prestes, who was from Sao Paulo and a competing oligarch. However, much to his supporters' discontent, Vargas was defeated by Prestes in March 1930. It wasn't until the assassination of Vargas's running mate in July 1930 that he decided to take action. Although the reason for the assassination was most likely local, Vargas and his party, the Liberal Alliance, blamed the federal government. Still upset over losing the elections, Vargas's supporters in the armed forces used this as a chance to unseat President Luiz. The coup d'etat began on October 3rd in Rio Grande do Sul and Minas and moved into Rio during the last week of October. According to Williams, after assuming power, the Vargas coalition would turn the coup of 1930 into a revolution, with the post-1930 regime acting as a purifying force of redemption. The Vargas regime would seek to create a new national identity and culture. The government, and more specifically the Minister of Education, dictated what forms of culture were Brazilian and which ones were not. Everyone fought to align themselves with the government in hopes of controlling culture and having their art form promoted. This fighting led to the culture wars that would shape the politics of the first Vargas regime and the Estado Novo. In these culture wars, bureaucrats, artists, intellectuals, critics, and everyday citizens competed against one another and the state for control of Brasilidade, an intangible but highly coveted sense of Brazilianness. Williams says that at stake in these culture wars was not just the definition of good and bad art, but rather the consecration of good and bad Brazilian art, and the enthronement of dominant cultural brokers willing to protect and defend their cultural positions in the name of protecting national culture. The state created federal cultural managers who directed a remarkable amount of energy toward the stimulation, proliferation, and officialization of cultural activities deemed expressive of a national ethos. Cultural managers were described by critics not as promoters of the arts, but rather brutal thought police. Their main purpose was, in fact, to suppress subversion among leftist intellectuals and control the spread of ideas. The culture wars were also fought among government institutions such as the Ministry of Justice, Labor, and the Army, who all competed against the Ministry of Education for cultural hegemony. Williams describes that, on the eve of the Estado Novo, the stage had been set for a showdown between the Ministry of Education and the increasingly hardline Ministry of Justice, because both ministries fought for a controlling interest in the federal government's institutional and technological investment in mass media. In the end, the Ministry of Education received responsibilities for film, while the Ministry of Justice controlled the educational broadcast service. Williams says that victory in the battle for state resources guaranteed privileged access to the sites of the national imaginary, which in turn transformed cultural positions into political power and cultural artifacts into national icons. The Vargas regime was inventing a national memory by calling these artifacts national icons and presenting them in federal museums. In building museums, not only could Vargas manage culture, but he could also manage the past. Before the coup of 1930, there was not a uniform sense of Brazilianness or a shared history. Vargas sought to create national icons around which all Brazilians could unite. Architecture was another area of cultural conflict. Traditionalists who favored neo-colonial architecture and modernists who preferred the avant-garde fought over national patrimony. In the end, the Vargas regime came to prefer modernism. This was a bit of a paradox because modernist architecture had long been dismissed by conservatives and dictatorial regimes as being communistic and ugly. However, Vargas saw modernism as a way to renew Brazilian society and traditionalism as representing the old republic. One of the best examples of modernism of the Vargas era is the Ministry of Education and Health building. Censoring and propaganda were important parts of the Estado Novo's cultural management. Most forms of mass media, such as press and radio, were declared public utility, which gave government the right to censor almost all forms of communication. According to Williams, journalists, directors, radio announcers, and musicians had to negotiate within a new institutional environment in which federal and local agencies threatened sanctions or closure for private enterprises that strayed from the type of cultural programming deemed appropriate for the new regime. Supporters of these policies maintained that they would create an improved, virtuous, and organic Brazilian culture. In reality, the Vargas regime's main motive was to manage the spread of trends and ideas. In March 1945, Vargas reorganized the Department of Press and Propaganda, or DIP, as the National Information Department, which was to be an instrument of the promotion of Brazilian culture. This would end the agency's control over the press. The agency started dealing with non-political activities such as promoting Brazilian tourism. The reorganization of this agency marked the end of the censorship and propaganda. The fall of the DIP was a definite sign that there remained little time for the Estado Novo, and Vargas was ran out of office on October 29, 1945, in a bloodless military coup. Although Vargas was no longer in power, many of the institutions of the Estado Novo remained, such as the agencies of cultural management and many of the directors hired under Vargas. According to Williams, all post-Estado Novo constitutions have mandated that the state protect and promote culture, authorizing the state to maintain institutions of cultural management. The period after the Revolution of 1945 was a landscape conquered by the state and marked by memorials of Brazilianness, where hegemonic claims to Brasilidade remained elusive. This book is important because it takes into account the close relationship between art and politics during the Vargas regime. Previous historians focused solely on either politics or art, failing to connect the two. Williams examines the politics of culture and the culture of politics, which is essential when studying Vargas's Brazil. Although Williams does a good job at introducing the general history of the Estado Novo, a bit of prior knowledge on Brazilian history would help. And I wouldn't recommend this book to someone not interested in the cultural side of politics, since it is the main subject of the book. However, for students of Latin American history looking to gain a different perspective, Culture Wars in Brazil, the First Vargas Regime by Darrell Williams is a definite must-read.